Magic Johnson is not the person you think you already know. The booze right on the home court, a cruel nickname that turned magic into tragic, an HIV diagnosis that left all of America stunned, a comeback smothered by the fear of his own fellow players, a friendship that took nearly 3 decades to heal, and even a business empire that began with a failure of hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are 10 things you may not know about Magic Johnson. And first is the time the man most beloved by Los Angeles suddenly became the villain right at the Forum. In the 1981-82 season, Magic was only 22 years old, already had a championship, Finals MVP, and had just signed a 25-year contract worth $25 million with the Lakers. But behind the familiar smile, he was growing increasingly dissatisfied with coach Paul Westhead's half-court offense system, a system Magic felt was stifling the speed and improvisation that had once made the Lakers dangerous. In November 1981, the frustration exploded when Magic publicly declared that if the situation did not change, he wanted to be traded. Just 1 day later, the Lakers fired Westhead. To the press and the fans, everything seemed too clear. Magic complained, the coach lost his job. A 22-year-old superstar was suddenly described as a pampered, selfish player with enough power to decide who sat in the coaching chair. When the Lakers returned to the Forum, the cheers for Magic turned into boos. The man who had once helped this city celebrate a championship was now treated by his own home crowd as a traitor. The scandal even spread beyond basketball when Magic's advertising contract with 7-Up was not renewed afterward. But what most of the public did not know at the time was that Jerry Buss was said to have already gone quite far in the decision to replace Westhead before Magic publicly demanded a trade. And Magic was not the only player dissatisfied with the offense. He was simply the one who said it out loud. Even so, his reputation had been damaged. At the age of 22, Magic learned that just one crisis was enough to turn a hero into a villain. And if the boos in Los Angeles had hurt, Boston a few years later came up with an even crueler way, taking the very name Magic and turning it into mockery. By the 1984 NBA Finals, the matchup between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird had become one of the greatest rivalries in American sports, where every mistake could change the way people looked at a superstar. The Lakers had a great chance to leave Boston with a 2-0 advantage in Game 2. But after James Worthy's disastrous pass that was stolen by Gerald Henderson, the game returned to even. In the final seconds, the Lakers failed to create a decisive shot and ultimately lost in overtime. Game 4 was even more painful. The Lakers once again held the late-game advantage, but Magic committed a crucial turnover then missed free throws in overtime, helping the Celtics survive. By Game 7, Boston ended the series, and Magic's mistakes were collected into a cruel story. Magic was turned into Tragic Johnson. The nickname that once represented no-look passes, the smile and Showtime, now became a taunt that he could collapse just when the greatest pressure appeared. That truly haunted Magic. After one of the mistakes in the finals, he admitted he could not stop thinking about it. The defeat to Boston, therefore, did not just take away a championship, it made the entire country question whether Magic had enough guts in the decisive moments. But he did not take many years to answer. 1 season later, the Lakers met the Celtics again in the 1985 Finals, and this time defeated Boston right at Boston Garden to win the championship. Magic did not need to argue with those who had called him tragic. The trophy answered for him. However, the strange thing is that while the public had witnessed Magic lose control under the pressure of a basketball game, those close to him had seen a completely different version. There was one night, the pressure around Magic Johnson did not come from Larry Bird, the boos, or a finals game. The Lakers were staying at a hotel in Philadelphia when a fire broke out, forcing the players to quickly leave their rooms and find a way to evacuate. There was no showtime, no fast break, nor thousands of spectators waiting for Magic to create a spectacular moment. In that chaos, Magic led his teammates down the fire escape stairs to get outside safely. This story rarely appears in the highlight reels of his career, and it does not mean Magic alone saved the whole team, The noteworthy thing lies in a simpler detail. When an unusual situation happened off the court, those around him still trusted the direction Magic was going and followed him. On the court, Magic was famous for seeing the open space before others realized it, delivering the ball to the right place before the defense could react. But in that hotel that night, there was no basketball in his hands, only the reflex to move, to find the way out, and to keep going forward. Perhaps that is also part of the reason Magic always seemed comfortable when others needed him to lead the way. But strangely, there was a place in his life where he once said he did not need to lead anyone, did not need to become a superstar, and also did not need to wear the magic smile for the whole world. That was the place where Irvin Johnson could let everything down and simply be himself. And that place was the basketball court. For millions of Americans, Magic Johnson was the radiant smile, the no-look passes, Showtime Lakers, and a superstar who seemed born to live under the lights. But behind Magic was still Irvin Johnson, who had to carry the enormous expectations that image created. Magic once described the court as his own world, where he could relax, let everything flow naturally, and temporarily forget the outside pressures. That was a paradox. For most people, standing in front of nearly 20,000 spectators was pressure. For Magic, that was when life became simplest. On the court, there was only the ball, teammates, opponents, and the spaces that he seemed to see before everyone else. He did not need to think about headlines, advertising contracts, or the fact that all of America was always waiting for Magic to smile. Basketball was not just a profession, it was the place where Irvin could temporarily stop being a celebrity and simply be himself. For more than a decade, no matter what happened outside, he could still step across the sideline and return to that familiar world. In the fall of 1991, Magic was 32 years old, and the Lakers were preparing for a new season. There was no reason for him to think that Sanctuary was about to disappear. Then a preseason medical checkup led to additional tests, and the result received suddenly turned his entire basketball future into a question mark. But the most frightening thing at that time was not yet whether Magic could still play basketball. First, Irvin had to go home and tell the truth to the woman who had just become his wife. And that truth was more frightening than any finals Magic had ever gone through. In the fall of 1991, the tests confirmed he was HIV positive. Just a few weeks earlier, on September 14th, Magic had married Cookie. But at this time Cookie was pregnant, and Magic's greatest fear was not only how long he had left to live, he did not yet know if his wife had contracted HIV, nor if the unborn child would be affected. On the way home, the man who had faced Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, and the most intense NBA games no longer had any tactics to rely on. No timeout, no decisive pass, no fourth-quarter comeback. Only a husband who had to walk through the door and tell his wife that their lives had just changed completely. According to what Magic and Cookie later recounted, Cookie was shocked and frightened. She had to think about herself, the child in her womb, and the possibility that the man she had just married might die. In the early 1990s, HIV/AIDS was still covered by misinformation and stigma, and for many Americans, an HIV-positive diagnosis was almost equivalent to a death sentence. Therefore, the waiting period for the test results became a nightmare for the Johnson family. Finally, they received the most important news: Cookie was negative, and the child she was carrying was also not infected with HIV. That boy later became E.J. Johnson, but Magic still did not know what his own future would be. He told Cookie that if she wanted to leave, he would understand. Cookie refused. She chose to stay and fight together with her husband, even though neither of them at that time could know how long the battle would last. That did not mean all the difficulties in their marriage immediately disappeared. It only meant that at the most frightening moment, Cookie decided not to walk away. But when the private crisis began to have answers, Magic and Cookie had to face another decision. Should they tell the truth to all of America? And the person who helped them make that decision was not a Lakers star or a famous doctor, but a woman who was facing HIV/AIDS in a way even more brutal than Magic. And that woman was Elizabeth Glaser. She did not know HIV from books or press conferences. She had lived in that fear every day since contracting the virus through a blood transfusion while giving birth, then watching her own family be changed by HIV/AIDS. In a time when the disease was still covered by stigma, fear, and countless misunderstandings, Elizabeth became one of the strongest voices of the AIDS advocacy movement in the United States. That was why Magic went to her. He did not just need someone to explain the medical facts, he needed someone who understood the feeling of having to live with the question of how society would look at him, how the family would be hurt, and what happens when a disease becomes a label bigger than the person himself. Elizabeth helped Magic see what he had not fully realized at the time. If one of America's most famous black athletes, a heterosexual man whom the public had never associated with the image of HIV, stepped forward and publicly announced his status, he could break the stereotypes that were making millions of people think HIV only belonged to a certain group of people. But Cookie was still afraid. Turning a family crisis into national news meant they would lose most of their privacy right when life was most fragile. Therefore, Magic asked Elizabeth to speak directly with her. The two women talked with each other for about 1 to 2 hours, not with big slogans, but with the experience of someone who had lived in the reality that Cookie was afraid of having to enter. After that conversation, Cookie agreed they would tell the truth to the public. Elizabeth also asked Magic for one more thing: to continue using his voice to educate people about HIV/AIDS even when one day she was no longer there to do that work. And Magic carried that promise with him. On November 7, 1991, he stepped in front of a row of cameras and told America that he was HIV positive and would leave the NBA. For the audience, that was a shocking moment. But behind those few minutes at the microphone was a chain of private conversations that had turned a personal diagnosis into a public mission. America praised Magic for that courage. But less than a year later, he would discover a more uncomfortable truth. People can clap when you talk about HIV, but that does not mean they are ready to stand next to you when there is blood on the court. And that is exactly what Magic was about to face. In early 1992, he returned at the All-Star Game and proved that his basketball ability had not disappeared. After that, the Dream Team in Barcelona showed that Magic was still capable of competing with the best players in the world. But few people remember that he did not intend to stop at those special appearances. At the end of 1992, Magic was actually preparing to return to the Lakers, joining training camp and preseason with the goal of playing a controlled workload NBA season. He was trying to get back the place that had once made Irvin feel like himself. Then in a preseason game against Cleveland, Magic suffered a cut on his hand and started bleeding. The game had to be stopped to treat it. But what haunted him was not the wound. Magic later recounted that he saw the fear on the faces of those around him. During the same period, Karl Malone and several other players publicly expressed concerns about playing against someone who was HIV positive. Malone was not the only one who made Magic change his decision. Those reactions reflected the fear and misinformation about HIV that still existed widely across America in the early 1990s. Magic's body had proven he could still play, but every scratch or drop of blood now risked turning a basketball game into a debate about HIV. Before the regular season began, Magic announced his retirement again. He did not say he was completely forced out of the NBA, but he admitted that the reactions of others had contributed to the decision. That was a painful paradox. In 1991, HIV took basketball away from Magic. In 1992, when he was strong enough to take it back, it was the fear of HIV from those around him that made the comeback almost impossible to continue. And one of the deepest wounds of that period involved a person Magic had once been so close to that they used to kiss each other on the cheek before NBA Finals. That friend was Isaiah Thomas. In the late 1980s, when the Lakers and Pistons kept clashing in the NBA Finals, Magic and Isaiah were still famous for a closeness so great that they often lightly kissed each other on the cheek before games. That was not an act for television. The two were truly close, even though on the court they were ready to compete to the end. But the tense matchups between the Lakers and the Bad Boys Pistons gradually damaged that relationship, And the biggest break came after Magic publicly announced he was HIV positive. Magic later said that he believed Isaiah had raised questions or contributed to the rumors about his sexuality at the time when he was being scrutinized by all of America. Isaiah denied that. Therefore, this is not a proven fact, but a feeling of betrayal that Magic carried for many years. What made it more painful was that Magic did not just see Isaiah as an opponent. He had once viewed him as a friend close enough that he should have stood by his side when everything became worst. From Magic's perspective, the silence or what he believed Isaiah had said completely changed that friendship. Then the 1992 Dream Team appeared and turned the crack into a gap that was almost impossible to heal. Magic later admitted he had participated in opposing Isaiah being selected for the Olympic team, even though Isaiah's absence was not decided by Magic alone but involved many other relationships and tensions in the NBA at that time. But for Isaiah, being left out of that historic roster was a very real wound. The two men who had once stood in front of millions of spectators and exchanged intimate gestures now almost no longer had a real friendship. The surprising thing is not that they were angry at each other for a few years. The surprising thing is that Magic Johnson, the man who built his entire public image around optimism, resilience, and second chances, could hold on to that wound for nearly 3 decades. And the surprising thing is that Magic did not lack opportunities to repair that relationship earlier. According to what he later shared, his own family had for years urged him to talk to Isaiah again, to end a battle that had lasted too long. But Magic still delayed. The man who always talked about hope, second chances, and not letting the past decide the future, had a wound that he himself did not want to open. It was not until December 2017, nearly 3 decades after the Lakers-Pistons years and the Dream Team, that Magic and Isaiah sat face-to-face on NBA TV. No more uniforms, no more finals, no more championships or arguments that needed a winner. Only two men who had grown much older, looking back at a friendship that had once been close enough for them to kiss each other on the cheek in front of millions of spectators and then disappeared into years of silence. Magic spoke about the time they had been close, about the accumulated wounds and the things both had done that made the distance grow larger. Then he apologized. Magic's voice began to break. Isaiah was emotional, and finally the two stood up and hugged each other. That moment did not prove that all the old disputes had been resolved, nor did it determine who was right or wrong in each story. What mattered more was that after nearly 30 years, both finally decided to stop keeping score in a battle that no longer brought anything but loss. For Magic, that was also a reminder that the smile America had seen for decades did not mean Irvin had never held resentment, anger, or things he could not yet forgive. There are wounds that take a very long time to become small enough for a hug to step over. Magic took nearly 3 decades to repair a friendship. But when basketball disappeared from his life at the age of 32, he did not have 3 decades to decide who he would become next, and the first attempt off the court almost immediately failed. And that was when Magic had to learn something completely new. Being famous does not mean knowing how to do business. Today, many people look at Magic Johnson as one of the most successful former athletes in American business and imagine that after leaving the NBA, he almost immediately turned his name into an empire. The reality was different. Basketball had been Magic's identity, while in business, many people wanted to meet Magic Johnson, take photos with him, or use his name to attract attention, but that did not mean they regarded Irvin Johnson as a serious business partner. One of the first lessons came from the sporting goods store he opened in Baldwin Hills. Magic believed he understood the customers. He chose products that a man like himself thought buyers would like, but then realized the young customers in that area had completely different tastes. The store failed, and Magic said he lost about $200,000. For a millionaire, that amount was not a disaster that could destroy a life. But the value lay in the lesson. Celebrity cannot replace consumer research. Magic began to listen more, study the community more carefully, and ask the question he had previously thought he already knew the answer to: what do the people here really want? That failure itself helped shape a larger business thesis. For many years, American corporations often viewed urban communities with large Black and Latino consumers as markets that were too risky or lacked purchasing power. Magic believed they were missing a huge number of customers. He began to prove that with projects like Magic Johnson Theaters, bringing high-quality movie theaters into areas that many major chains did not prioritize. After that came the relationship with Starbucks, where Magic did not simply bring a famous brand into Black neighborhoods. What he tried to prove was that cultural understanding could become a measurable business advantage. From how locations were chosen, the customer experience, to understanding the consumption habits of each community. Of course, not everything he touched succeeded. The talk show The Magic Hour only lasted a short time, and some other ventures did not last either. But that is exactly the point that makes Magic's second career more noteworthy than the story of a superstar becoming a billionaire. That empire did not begin with a genius pass or a perfect decision. It began with Magic losing money, admitting he had been wrong, and learning how to listen. The man who had once been booed by Lakers fans themselves, the man who had seen the fear on the faces of other players when his hand was bleeding, and the man who had lost $200,000 because of a failed store, were all the same person, Irvin Johnson, the human being behind the name Magic. And perhaps that is what America has seen the least. For more than 4 decades, we remember the moments Magic did what seemed impossible. But the least told stories often begin after the magic no longer worked, and Irvin had to find a way to get back up on his own. And even after all of that, there are still other chapters that most fans do not fully know. From the Lakers coaching stint that lasted only 16 games, to the time he publicly confronted the way the American government handled the AIDS crisis.